الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing on our series on the fiqh of food, we were talking about last week some of the rules and regulations in what makes something halal. And we finished last week's lesson by arguing that the origin, al-asl, for food and drink is hil, permissibility. And prohibition then is something which needs evidence. So before we continue to the subject, we should know that food then can be divided into three categories, food and drink. The first one is that which is halal. As we said, the origin is halal. And we mentioned the evidences for that last week. So food which is halal is lawful, and that's the origin, food and drink. The second category is the opposite, haram. That which is unlawful due to a text or due to a principle which we'll talk about soon. And last one is the doubtful. Something which we're not clear. Is it halal or haram? In reality, it goes back to one of the two, but the origin is avoiding it. Leaving off the doubtful, that's the origin. So if someone finds something which they can ascertain is halal or haram, the end ruling is either halal or haram. But the origin is that one not sure, leave it off is better. As the Rasul ﷺ encouraged us and told us that if something is doubtful, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. But if someone were to look carefully at these issues, if they have ilm and did the investigation, and they find that it's something halal in their opinion, then they are allowed to follow that. And if someone else investigates and finds it to be closer to haram based on the principles and the statements and the fatwa of the ulama, then they can follow that. But for the origin, it's to stay away, and that's the best and safest. So with this being said, what makes something haram? This is the most important point. So before we get into the categories of food and the different examples, we have to know the rules. If the asl hil, the origin is permissibility, what makes something haram? The ulama, they mention five principles to keep in mind if you want to know something's haram from food and drink. First, that is textually prohibited. If something is textually prohibited في القرآن والسنة, then it's haram. يعني نص في الكتاب والسنة that says this particular food is haram. In that case, it's haram. Example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 3, حُرِّمَتْ, it's prohibited for you. Then He mentions a series of food. So it starts with mayta, the dead meat, and then animals which are beaten to death, strangled to death, etc. So here Allah clearly says mayta, the dead meat's haram. So textually prohibited. And that extends to many others. So we have to remember these five principles. Because if you remember them, all of the discussion goes back to these. Because if something, this would make something haram. This is how we know. Otherwise, it's already halal. So first, textual prohibition. So someone has to investigate fil kitab and sunnah. Is there a text that says this particular food, drink, this particular animal? Because we'll talk about animals today too. Is it haram? If so, it's haram. Because if nas, wadih, there's no need for something else after that. Of course, if the scholars differed, if the text is saying it's disliked, and that's also part of the responsibility to investigate. So number one, that is textually prohibited in the Quran and Sunnah with wording that indicates prohibition. Number two, that the food falls into a description which legislation has said is haram. So this is tahrim in terms of wasf, in terms of description. So it's not haram in and of itself, but because there's a description, the Quran and Sunnah have mentioned this type of food is haram. This type of drink is haram. If you find food today that falls into that quality or that description, فهو haram. Example, Hadith ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said every intoxicant is khamar and every khamar is prohibited. Hadith Muslim. So we all know this, intoxicants. If someone were to ask us today, why is marijuana haram? Yeah, bring me nas. And some people do this because they want to make halal what's haram. Or they think that they have an argument. How will you respond to them? You're not going to find a hadith about this, even though it existed. The cannabis existed in the 7th century, Hijri, at that time. But at the time of Rasul, this wasn't the khamr of the day. We bring this hadith, tahrim al-nas. Al-khamr ma khamr aql. Intoxicants is that which clouds the mind. So if this cannabis or these other things we don't know about till today do what this hadith says is khamr, i.e. they intoxicate, فهو haram. Tahrim by way of wasf, It's very important because some people, they're looking for the first category, nas. They don't know the rest. So we have to tell them, it doesn't work that way. Otherwise, a lot of things you would say, I don't find. So this is important, the second category. Third one, something which is considered filthy, min al-khaba'ith, something which is filthy or repulsive. And the ulama, they debated about this one. But something which the sound fitrah finds repulsive or disgusting or filthy, it's haram. Now the ulama, they debated, what does that mean? But where is the origin for this principle? Surah Al-A'raf, ayah 157. We said this point last week as well. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah describes them as to come to the ummah, and He makes halal for them the tayyibat, wa yuharrimu alayhim al-khaba'ith. He makes halal for them the tayyibat, the wholesome good foods, and He makes prohibited for them the khaba'ith, the filthy things. So the ulama then said, if something is considered khabith, then it's haram. But the problem is, what is khabith? To who and to whom? So scholars have two groups then in this, because how do we know something is khabith? Something's filthy or repulsive. Maybe one culture is filthy, another culture is not. Some group of scholars, they held the view, for example, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah from the Shafi'iyya, Ibn Abidin from the Ahnaf, Ibn Qudama from the Hanabila. This group, they said it's what the Arab at the time of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to consider repulsive. They attached this ayah to the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said the Arab at that time, they had good nature and fitrah in general. And the Quran came, they were addressing them. So if something's prohibited, something was repulsive according to them, then it's khabith. And this actually, a lot of scholars held this view. But the problem with this obviously is that the wahi is not only for them, it's for the rest of the nations. So for example, we know in Jahiliyyah some things the Arab just left off. As we mentioned last week, they made some things haram by themselves. But in the idea is that if they thought it was repulsive, but later in the ummah, there's some other nation culture that says this is okay, or finds it that it's part of their food, can it be haram for them? So the correct opinion is not this one. Rather, it's the opinion argued by Shaykh al-Islam bin Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And he actually said it's the Jumhur ulama. Although the first category also says it's the Jumhur ulama. So as a side benefit, whenever we read the books of fiqh, you find many times someone, alim would say, Jumhur said this. And then you find another scholar on the other side said the Jumhur was here. So just because someone said it's majority doesn't mean it's the majority. You have to investigate. So sometimes we get caught up in that. And I will call majority, you will call majority, and then who's the liar? Who's the one who's wrong? And this is the problem. Sometimes the ulama, they differed. Some thought majority fil madhab, some kharij madhab. Some they said majority because that which they knew. So Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah's argument is, whatever is considered repulsive according to the deen, which is any food or drink, which is harmful for someone's deen or body, that's khabith. If it's good for the deen and the body, that's tayyib. And this argument he brings in Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 19, page 12. And if you want more, go to Tafsir ibn Kathir, and the same ayah, 7:157. Because Shaykh al-Islam says that to say this is not correct, because Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmed, and others, Shafi'i as well, or some of the Shafi'iyya, but others differed, and they said at the end of the day it can't be limited to the Arab, because the Ummah itself is great, is expanded, but more importantly, the deen has come to describe what's halal and haram. So if we go back to the Arab, where is the hikmah behind the revelation? And there's a lot more argument they have there. And this is also the view of Shaykh Salih Fawzan in Kitab al-At'imah, pages 52 to 53. So when we say something is repulsive, what it means then, it's bad for your body and your deen. That's what it means, khabith. The deen decides it. And obviously Allah made things halal because it's good. And made haram some things because it's bad. If we left it to the Arab, then it will restrict some of the foods people eat. So if that's the third one, the fourth one goes hand in hand, which is that it's harmful. So we said the third one is that it's something khabith or filthy. The fourth one is harmful. It goes hand in hand. So if something is harmful to the body, like harm which is real, not harm which is assumed, it's affirmed, فَهُوَ الْحَرَامِ. Example, poisonous fish, or plants, or animals, or intoxicants, etc. Allah, He says, وَلَا تَقَتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not kill yourselves, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. Verily Allah is over you ever merciful. Surah An-Nisa, verse 29. And the hadith of Ubadah bin Samit, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and others, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. There's no harm, no reciprocating harm. Hadith Hassan. So if this is the case, food which is known to be harmful, you cannot consume it. Now what about if the food is harmful to a certain degree, or then it's a little bit different. But the origin, if something is harmful in and of itself, it's not allowed to consume. Imam Nawawi says, rahimahullah, everything which is harmful to eat, like glass or rocks or poison, is haram. Anything that's harmful to eat, even things that are not food. For example, someone likes to eat rocks, well, haram, because it's harmful for the body. And this is important because Islam has come to observe the people's health. So you will see this is an important principle will come. And lastly, that which is najis, that which is impure. And when we say najis, means najis in and of itself. Yani it's something which it's in and of itself najis, based on the Quran and Sunnah. Not something which is najis temporarily because something fell on it. We're talking about that which is najis. And the ulama have a consensus on this, that which is najis is haram to eat. Ibn Abdul rahimahullah, died 423 Hijri, he says that the Muslims did not differ that the prohibited impurities which are prohibited in and of themselves are for the most part from the most severe prohibitions, and it's not permissible to eat any of them. Kitab al-Tamheed, volume 1, page 142. So for example, if we go now and we extend an example for this, we take a look at something like impurities when someone uses the washroom. You can't consume those things. But the ulama often mention, for example, the pig. If someone were to say, what's the prohibition behind, or why is the pig prohibited, pork? We have nas, first category. And secondly, it's also a najis, as many of the ulama argued. So therefore, they put them together, say, from these two angles. And obviously, why we're talking about something impure? Not everything which is haram is impure. It's important because some people, they mix the two. Whatever is najis, right, something which is najis, it's haram for us to benefit by it. But that which is haram doesn't mean it's najis. So it could be something haram, it's not najis, but that which is najis is haram. And what happens then they say you can't benefit by it, let alone eat it. So we're talking about in and of itself, not something which it's halal and najis fell on it. So the benefit behind these 5 categories, if you remember these 5, everything is asal is halal. But then if it falls into one of these 5 principles, then it becomes haram. So these principles govern all of the topic. And you can go back to them, and the khilaf between the ulama goes back to one of these. Wadah, inshallah, it becomes clear. So inshallah, if we understood this point, these 5, we then now go to the categories of food. The scholars, when they talk about food, they break it into categories. And usually the 2 overarching categories are animals and their byproducts and non-animal foods. So foods which are animals, and we'll start today with the animals, and then the foods which are not animals, plants and fruits and other things like that. And so when we talk about it, most people, they discuss these issues, they're either interested in one of the 2. Hayawanat, when it comes to the animals, the ulama, they discuss them. And the animals break into 3 categories. And this is important to know this, because in Islam, these things help Muslims. When we go out to buy things and we know our sharia, everything has wisdom, but also helps you, make your life easier. Because we said it's not permissible for the Muslim to walk around confused. This is halal, this is haram. They should know clearly, this is halal and this is haram, or this is something which I wouldn't, it's doubtful, leave it. So the animals, when we talk about animals, we're talking about the origin now. Origin of animals and how to categorize them. But before we continue, you should know, when we talk about the animals here, there's rules for each of them. But then there's something important to add. Foods and drink could be halal in and of themselves. So if you categorize the food as halal, it's halal in and of itself. Or if it's haram now in and of itself. But then the second part, which is important, how do you prepare the food? That's another thing we're not talking about now. So for example, if I bring you a halal animal, then I slaughtered the haram way, it still becomes haram. So we're not talking about that now. Slaughter is for another topic. So some people will read this and say, but what if I did this to the chicken? Leave that for now. We're just talking about the chicken. We want to know what the ruling is for animals by themselves. Tayyib, 3 types. First one, hayawan barri, animals which are land animals. Any animal lives on the land. It's called a land animal, hayawan barri. It's land, that's it, doesn't go in the water. And the opposite is true. The other one, hayawan al-bahri, the one that's always in the water. So the first one, land animals. It lives only on the land. Second one is the water animal or water game. That's always in the water. And the last one, barma'iyya. Yani animals which are land and water. Some translate as amphibian, although most of them they fall into that kind, but they're not always the case. So al-barma'iyya is the animal which is land and water. And then there's the khilaf there, because you can say, is it there or is it here? Where you categorize it depends. Tayyib, each one has rules. So we'll start with land animals today and continue next week with them. The water animals are a little bit easier. The one that's in the middle can have other rulings. So land-based animals, what do we have to know about them? Well, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught us certain ones amongst them are haram. Others, we have no texts. Some of them, there is doubt. So what do we have to know about land animals? The scholars, they divided them into types, but it's not important for us in our discussion right now. What we need to know, the origin of all land animals is that they're permissible, because all food and drink is permissible. But the problem now is which ones are haram. So instead of giving us examples of all of them, we should go back to the rules, the 5 rules that we mentioned. So number 1, the first rule was if something's textually prohibited. Some scholars, what they do is they tell you all the halal ones, all the haram ones. And then what happens is you might forget them. You get mixed up. So just to know which ones are haram is easier than know which ones are halal. So which ones are haram goes back to the 5 rules. First rule, textual prohibition. Is there any animal which is textually prohibited? And the answer is yes. So we'll give an example. One animal Rasulullah ﷺ said it's not permissible for us to eat is the domesticated donkey. And we call it himar al-ahli, al-ahliyya, or ahli. Humur ahliyya. What kind of himar is this? It's not a wild one. It's a domesticated one, the one you use to carry your stuff around. There's a clear text in Bukhari and Muslim. Rasulullah told one of the companions to announce to the ummah, Allah and His Messenger have prohibited the domesticated donkey. So that's textual proof. If someone say, what else behind it? Well, most people, they don't eat this animal. But there's ones which are not. Outside, for example, I believe this is called the zebra. You might have the one they say that is the wahshiyan, the wild one. But the wild one is different than domesticated. Domesticated is like the one, when we hear donkey, that's the one we're talking about. So that's textual proof, so that's haram. Another example of textual proof, but it's not textual proof in terms of specification, but by wasf. That's number 2, right? Is any animal that has fangs or any bird that has claws. Any animal that has fangs or any animal that has claws are birds. So before we continue, the first one is haram by nas. For example, you find a text that says haram. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said haram. It's haram. Example, I gave the donkey at Bukhari Muslim. Second category is the animals which are haram to eat because they fall into this wasf. They have fangs or it's a bird with claws. Tayyib Sheikh, you have a question? No? Have fun. So, for example, we're going to give the example now. Hadith. Bukhari al-Muslim. Al-Bukhari wal-Muslim. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he mentions in there, it says in the hadith of Abi Tha'lab al-Khushani, نهى رسول صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أكل كل ذي ناب من السباع. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prohibited the eating of every animal with fangs. وكل ذي مخلب من الطيور. And every bird that has talons, like claws. It's hadith Bukhari Muslim, clear. This is wasf. It didn't mention by name each one, but you can just look at the animal and put it in there. So what's an example of an animal that falls into that? Lions and tigers. It's not allowed to eat them. They're siba', they're wild animals. Other examples of birds, eagles and hawks with their claws, you can't. So someone may say, what's the hikmah behind the prohibition? Because this is a question that comes a lot from non-Muslims. Hukum al-hikmah. There's the ruling and the hikmah. What's the wisdom? And they ask you because they want to know, Muslims, you have all this dietary law. Why? So the hikmah, the ulama discussed many reasons. But Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his student Imam ibn Qayyim, rahimahumullah, they said the prohibition has to do with the nature of the animal. These animals which are rebellious arrogant and wild, they affect the body. Because if you wear them, they said, for example, wearing the skins of these animals are prohibited because these animals generally are wild and rebellious and they have some of them power and aggression, and that affects your arrogance. And if you eat it, it also. And this argument, many people will say, but how is that proven scientifically? To be honest, there's discussions about that in science as well. Psychosomatic, they call it, foods. Foods that affect your behavior and mind. And today it's actually something discussions are going. But this is one of the hikmah. If someone says, but what about this? We say, if we're not sure, the hikmah ta'abbudi. It's there clear in the text. If we cannot explain it, it's still textual. Because some people try to go too much. I want to know. And what we have to always be clear. Al-hukum yadur ma'illatihi. The rulings revolve around their juristic reasons. Not bi hikmatih. Not by their wisdoms. Because if somebody's now going to come and say, but akhi, what if I wore one? Then leave it alone. It's going around the illah. Because now, these animals are wasf. Tayyib. Other textual evidences may exist. So look for those. So let's go to the one about wasf again. Stay on this one. Some animals, we have no text, but we have a debate among the scholars. Does it fall into the wasf? A description. I'll give you an example. Between the ulama, they debated. Is eating an elephant permissible or not? And some of us, we're probably thinking, where are we going to get the elephant? But not for us, but those people who live with them. They may say, is it halal to eat it or not? Now, if someone were to ask this khilaf between the ulama, where is the khilaf? The khilaf has to do with the 5 things that we mentioned before. So do we have textual evidence about the elephant? No. What about the wasf? Does the elephant have fangs? Some ulama said these long horns are like fangs. فهو haram. Many of the ulama said this. Others, they said, it's not najis, the animal. We have no proof for that. But some, they said, like Imam Ahmed described to him, the Muslims, they're not known to eat this. So it's something repulsive. Who's going to eat the elephant? So you can see now they're coming from the third angle. We don't know anyone who eats this in our communities. But the major debate was the ulama who said it was haram, which is jumhur actually. They said because these tusks are like fangs. It goes into the hadith. But qawl rajih, wallahu a'lam, is halal. Because that's not a fang, it doesn't eat by it. And also, what the ulama say, what does a fanged animal mean? It hunts by it. This is what they said. Not just that it has it. So it's important. Some say the fangs, does it mean like if it has fangs, that's it? No, some say it has and eats by it. This is important because some say why else it has the fang? Not just for look, for eating and attacking. And we know the elephant is not an aggressive animal. Wallahu ta'ala alam, this is a view of a minority, like Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, and others, and some ulama say this is rajih, because we don't have textual, and we can't argue it fits into the wasf. But if you ever hear it's haram, now you know why. Because some people when they hear this say, I don't get it. How is it haram? Akhi, this hadith, this rule, that's where it goes. Tayyib, is it making sense? Because this is important, because if you do find khilaf, our question is not to challenge the ulama, but understand how did they divide into this. Another example is animals which we don't have any of these, but it's debatable again. But, so we'll give an example. We mentioned the pig. The pork is haram. Why is it haram? Some will say the reason why it's haram because it's filthy. That's one. And number 2, textual. So that's clear. No one debated that. But then they debated a few other examples, which we don't have to mention all of them. But we'll mention just one more category, which is now there are some animals, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said it's not permissible to kill them. And he mentions 4 of them. Anyone knows these 4? Comes in one hadith. 4 animals, mainly are insects, but you cannot kill them. Some insects, some animals. Anyone knows this hadith? I'll give you one. One is the ants. Anyone knows the other one? It mentions ants, bees, flies is another hadith, but it's not this one. So they mentioned, one hadith mentions the ants, the bee, the hudhud bird, it's found in Yemen, and the last one is the sard. Sard is like a kite, special type of bird, has a kind of big head. This hadith says, Rasulullah said prohibited to kill it. So that's now another rule. Any animal which comes in the Quran or Sunnah, you can't kill it, you can't eat it. This is an important rule, because Rasulullah in certain hadith says, do not kill this animal. If he says you can't kill it, many scholars say that's a rule, you can't eat it. Even though it's a khilaf again. Why can't you eat it, they said? Because if you can't kill it, how are you going to eat it? Good point. If you can't kill it, how are you going to eat it? Some will say, well, find it dead. Dead meat's haram in us. So what they said, others said, no, it's not rajih, it's not good enough. Because even though it's dead, or you can't kill it, what if you killed it because of the harm? Then you can eat it. For example, let's say someone likes to eat ants, I don't know, but let's assume. You kill them because you're not allowed to kill them, but they're coming to your house, too many of them. You kill them all. Can you collect them down and eat them? This is where some of the scholars say, you're not always killing them because you want to. You kill them out of danger. So the scholars differ, but many of them hold that view. Because the hadith says you can kill them, stay away from eating those animals too. Because the origin is you can't kill them, how did you eat them? Except for that which comes, again, if it shows you it's halal. And the reason I mention this category, because the last one amongst these things I just mentioned. طيب, we'll give one more example and we'll end with this to make us think about these rules. The ulama, someone discussed the issue of eating a fox. Tha'lab, a fox. What do the brothers think? Was it halal to eat this fox or not? Biqawaid, how are we going to know from the rules we mentioned? Can we eat this? If we remember the rules we mentioned, how can we argue it's halal or haram? First we begin with text. Anyone has a hadith about a fox? Allahu A'lam. We know we're not supposed to copy the fox in the salah, but we don't know. A hadith says don't eat the fox. But do we have a description of the fox? Something that's in it? For example, does the fox have fangs or sharp teeth? Yes. So some scholars say it's in the second category then. Wasf is from the sibah. Others have said that it is. Majority said that's what's haram because it is. Another example, the cat. Okay, we're not supposed to eat the cat because we know from those who are in your house like a furniture, but if someone were to think about eating a cat, it's halal or haram? It's haram because the same thing, it has the fangs. And someone would say, but the cat just eats anything, but mainly eats meat, right? And it eats small animals too, like this. And any other animal you can think of, you can put into there. Until the ulama, they kept going until they got to the monkey and the apes. And this is one we'll finish with. How about this one? Majority of the scholars say it's haram, but why? Because someone said, do monkeys eat other animals? Do they attack people? There are some ulama, they looked, they said, we don't know any alim who said it's halal. But if you look at it, it has fangs and it can eat people or things, even though it doesn't. So it's possible, but the description is clear. It has these fangs, and from what we do know, it doesn't, but it can. And majority of them agree to it being haram. So these 5 rules, if we remember them, inshallah, they will help us. Last thing we'll mention, connected to this, afwan, because we're talking about land-based animals, is the insects, the hasharat. Al-hasharat, the animals which are insects, there are scholars, they differ on these as well. So if someone to look at the discussion, they will say there's ways of approaching it. One, if there's a hadith that said it's halal, it's halal. Example, locust. Jarad, everyone knows what a locust is? Like a long grasshopper-like animal. Hadith Bukhari, Muslim, Sahaba used to eat it. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as well. That one's halal, we have text. But what about just the other ones? Someone sees a cockroach or someone sees something like this. So some the ulama differed. Some they said haram. Why? Because they said it's from those which are filthy, darra, harmful. And why? Because they came back to their principles. They said number 3 and 4. Like if you're going to eat a cockroach, it's harmful. And others said, we can't say that. Because some of them are harmful, okay, remove them. Others, they're not harmful, they're just as they are. So at the end of the day, the khilaf goes back to these things. You could argue that. Many scholars, they said it's haram because you wouldn't want to eat it in the first place. So number 3, and then they said 4, harmful. What's going to get out of it? But if today someone said eating certain ones have some benefit. I believe nowadays people eat these things for protein. Some benefit there. And they say that it's not poisonous maybe. Then we could argue it's halal, that's another scholarly opinion. So now if someone will hear either view, they can say the khilaf between the ulama is in 3 and 4. They said either it's repulsive or it's harmful. Some would say it's not harmful and repulsive, ala kitab wa sunnah. There's nothing about it there. Tayyib, inshallah. We'll end with this much. So these principles, the reason why we need them is to help us not to be in a state of confusion. And what I'm talking about here is the asl of the animal. I'm not talking about now what we call the prohibition by way of some kind of temporary prohibition or due to another outside reason. Yani some animals, they can become haram even though they're halal in origin due to an affair عارضا, it's outside, temporary affair that happened. Now I'll finish with this, so keep this in mind. These are the origins. These rules are for origins. But if I took a halal animal, like chicken, and I killed it the wrong way, next week and weeks after we'll talk about the slaughter method. That would make it haram. Take an animal which is halal like a chicken and you fed it something haram. Like we have today, some chickens, they're eating filth. This is called jalala. The Hadith Bukhari Muslim says you're not allowed to eat animals which are fed on impurities. So someone can come and say, but it's halal aslan. We say, correct, but now the animal unfortunately has a temporary problem. So you can make it go back to the origin by giving the halal food. So, alhamdulillah. But if it's slaughtered, it's slaughtered. We can't go back and bring it back to life. So keep that in mind, because most of the discussion nowadays amongst the brothers and sisters isn't even about the origin. Most people, they're just debating how was it slaughtered. But we have to know what is halal to begin with. Because if we don't know that, then we're going to get into these debates without even looking at the beginning. For example, if someone took a pig and did dhabh, right, according to the Sharia, is it halal now? Never. So this is important to keep that in your mind, so that next time you look to the halal and haram, you appreciate the rules. Because if you don't know these rules, then what happens? Always you'll be asking someone, is this halal? Is this halal? And that's not a good state to be in. The Muslim has to be ala yaqeen, certainty. And alhamdulillah for Islam and these qawa'id. Because other religions, they have either two extremes. One, they're too lenient. You find them eating everything and anything. Another group, too stringent. Everything's haram or too restricted, and that becomes harmful for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made for our deen halal al-tayyibat, haram al-khaba'ith. He didn't make the tayyibat haram, even some of them. Alhamdulillah. So learn these rules, and inshallah you can help teach your family about them, so next time you're going to buy food and know, you would know. Especially because we said last week halal food is so important for the iman. Inshallah, we end with this much. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Anyone has any question or something? Naam, Sheikh.
Yeah, barakallahu feek.
فيك بارك الله.
الحمار الذي نستفيد به في البلاد. الحمار العادي. هو حرام.
حرام. So the brother is asking with حمار عادي. حمار أهلي قالوا العلماء هو حرام. لكن حمار وحشي اللي خارج يعني يعيش في البرة هذا هو الحلال. زبرة. حرام. حرام. وإياكم. Yes.
With some of the rules that, or the principles that we use for the prohibition of food, does it extend to also medicine?
So the brother is now asking about the foods, the rules regarding the medicine. Medicine is slightly different, but it has something to do with these issues. So with that, we'll cover at the other side. So now we're talking about the animals, then we're talking about the non-animal products. So medicine has some rules, but we say the origin is that this is different, a little bit different. We'll come to those. Question says, someone offers you food because you're celebrating a certain religious holiday or birthday, etc. Is this halal? So we say those kind of celebration, birthdays, Christmas, we should not eat the food. Because those celebrations, as Muslims, we don't participate. Allah, He says in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورِ. The believers, they don't witness the evil, which the ulama mufassirun say it means the a'yad al-kuffar. So therefore, it's not allowed for us to witness it. When I give you the food, you cannot eat it because the ulama said it's ta'awun al-ithm al-udwan. For cooperating in sin and transgression, even though this is a little bit different, but we'll get to this later a little bit more. What if somebody give you something which is halal, like for example meat, but they slaughter it for that day? Khilaf ulama, but the asl is stay away because the ayah says they don't witness it. But there is a little bit different because they're giving you something halal. But Muslims should be careful. At the end we said, this one is doubtful. Some scholars say halal because you didn't ask. Some say haram and it's safer. Stay away from it because you open that door, they'll give you more and more. And sometimes you don't explain to them why you're taking it. You're just taking it. They think you're celebrating too. You didn't tell them I'm Muslim, I don't do it. But I take from you for good manners and I give you, no, but sometimes they don't know. So to avoid it is always the best. طيب inshallah, next week we will continue with the hayawan, the animals, or hayawan al-bahri, hayawanat al-bahriyah, and then we'll go to the other one, the middle. And inshallah these principles become easier to remember. Inshallah next week we'll continue. Walhamdulillah.